we've made it, guys. The final season of Seinfeld, season 9, which of course on disc 1 does have the last laugh featurette, but I'll save talking about references for that when we get to the last disc and we get to the Chronicle clip 2-part clip show. But with season 9, of course, being the last season, Seinfeld writers, of course, and NBC gave them permission to just go out and just do the craziest stuff they want. And I will be honest, not many episodes stand out to me too much in this season. There's some pieces of episodes I remember, but if I think it's you think of that piece, I wouldn't think, oh, that took place in the junk mail, or oh, that took place in the butter shave, or oh, that took place in the Puerto Rican Day Parade. I don't know. But I could at least understand the writing and not say it was goofy or anything. It was good writing. It's just not a lot of these episodes stand out to me like some of the other ones. But I think that whole idea of doing something goofy, like Spike Feresten said in the Inside Look, anytime they would do something that they wouldn't be as believable, Jerry would always say, well, remember the story of George pulling the golf ball out of the blowhole and reverting back to that? It's that was believable. We pulled that off. We can pull this off, basically. But I do see, how they did try to do some different things, just for something different in this last season. And again, the butter shave was a great illustration of that. Most of the stories, there isn't really too much to say about them. First off, the opening sequence, Jerry and George apparently, and even Kramer as well, tried growing out mustaches, which, they weren't fans of, and they stopped doing. They all shaved them off. Of course, Kramer got the late news to it and ran off, shaved it, and came back with a clean face. But, of course, it picks off. George was, still unemployed after he lost his job with the Yankees at the end of season 8. But, of course, had the severance package and ended up, fallen and had trauma from severe inactivity on his legs. So he, of course, was working on getting, his strength back in his legs. He's off crutches, but he still has his cane. And he gets a job interview with this playground equipment company called Play Now, which George's boss is played by Gordon Jump. And it seemed, though, that they only gave George this job because they thought he was handicapped. And they treated him like they opened up the red carpet for him in this episode, pretty much. They gave him his own private bathroom. They gave him, all this and that. They gave him, a chair, for him to sit in to, go up the stairs with. He was pretty well taken care of. Until they found out, of course, George, just went with the flow and didn't say, oh, no, I'm not handicapped. I'm just, I had an accident, this and that. But, of course, we'll explain how it got even more out of control a little bit. But that was his story. Jerry's story was Kenny Bania was back. And it felt like Kenny was riding his coattails. So Jerry would have his act before Kenny's. Jerry had a hot crowd. Bania had a hot crowd. But Kenny's taking credit for it. But Jerry thinks he only had a hot crowd because Jerry got the crowd hot before him. Even going as far as Bania was dating Jerry's old girlfriend Jenna, who was the girl back in the pothole who Jerry accidentally knocked her toothbrush into the toilet, played by Kristen Davis. Even, of course, George showed signs that he was actually enjoying Kenny's act, which drove Jerry absolutely nuts. And other things happening, too, that he felt that Kenny was just riding his coattails and, getting away with things because of him. How does Jerry stop that? We'll get to that, of course. Elaine's main story in this episode was, Elaine's going to brush it very quickly. Her and David Puddy get back together. It's the first time we've seen Puddy, which I didn't realize, since the face painter all the way back at the end of season 6. And they, I guess, went on a month-long trip to Europe, which was a big mistake. They got into a big fight, and they broke up, but they still have a 22-hour flight home. And on the plane ride, they got back together, they broke up. Got back together, and they broke up. Elaine was, Puddy was making conversation with some other lady on the plane. Elaine was making conversation with this guy who had like a non-American. I'm not sure what accent it was he had, but he was referred to as vegetable oil basically the whole episode. Even of course when they got back to the States and Elaine gets into the taxi, she is broken up with Putty again. Putty, I guess, she was told, sorry, they have a shortage on taxis. So who ends up getting into the taxi with her? Both Putty and vegetable oil. But that's basically all that happened with Elaine in this episode. Kramer, meanwhile, apparently was complaining how his shaving cream was not working for him anymore. So he starts shaving with butter. Of course, in one of the scenes, when he starts takes a stick of butter and starts shaving with it, his stage makeup gets on the butter. But then things go a little bit nuts whenever Kramer decides to buy a whole tub of butter, and he sunbathes after he just bathed himself in butter. And then he fell asleep. So he was trying to treat the butter like sunscreen, and instead he got his whole body fried up, basically. Which, of course, then seems to alarm Newman, because I think Kramer, there was a time where Kramer had to try to keep himself moist to relieve his skin from all the butter. And he even had a scene where Kramer sitting in his hot tub and Newman had to drop a tub of butter into it, but the smell just started overwhelming him and freaked him out. There was even a time where he was in Monk's and there was a shot of him looking at this delicious turkey, but then he just sees Kramer's head on the turkey, and there's a shot in which they had to blue screen it, and it makes it look like that Kramer's body is the turkey. He looks over hey buddy, and the wing of the turkey waves at him, which was done of course by pulling on a string, waving that, which again just freaked Newman out. Although he eventually was so overwhelmed by the scent, he almost tried to eat Kramer at the end of the episode. We'll get to that in a second. Meanwhile, though, George, of course, has a little bit of a problem. So when he first met with Play Now, they thought his right leg was bad. But then George accidentally twisted his ankle on his left leg, so he starts using the cane with his left hand. So his boss starts catching on to that as he thinks that's a little suspicious. But then George tries to use the excuse of it's just a mirrored image or whatnot. So because then he thought that he was handicapped on both legs, they actually bought George a scooter. Which didn't sit well with the other, handicapped people in the city. As there was this chase on their 3-mile-an-hour scooters, but then George's scooter died, so he got up and tried to pick up the scooter and run for his life. But who happens to catch him on the street? His boss. So they find out he's not handicapped. And how do they follow up with that? Well, that will have to be saved for the next episode in The Voice. But then Jerry had meanwhile, for Jerry to wrap up his story, he had the idea of trying to, end this whole thing of Banya being on his coattails by purposely flubbing his act so that way the crowd's not hawked for Banya's act. As he has the line, then let's see how he does up there without all the assistants. Which I mentioned it back in the opposite with George yelling at the people kicking the seats in the movie, saying if you don't shove, I'm going to take it outside and show you what it's like. And then back in the understudy, whenever Frank Costanza said in Korean, "This guy is just not my type of guy," that was from these bootleg Buddy Rich tapes of him chewing out his band and whatnot. Just basically some guy with a hot temper, basically. But this was the third one that he had used, was when Jerry basically said that let's see how he does up there without all the assistants. So he purposely blows his act, and of course, crowd wasn't too hot for Kenny, but afterwards, Kenny then gets offered to do a pilot, which again is kind of like him riding still Jerry's coattails. So Jerry couldn't win. And then, of course, in the midst of all that backstage, Kramer accidentally bumps into some guy who gets all this Parmesan cheese and whatnot all over Kramer, which sticks. Newman just happened to walk in, and because of all that on him and what all Kramer was holding, Newman tries to literally eat Kramer. So that was a goofy way to end the episode. But that's the butter shave. It's a decent episode. I know I kind of flew through, but there wasn't really too many details behind the stories. Again, I do like, George, with the whole thing with him getting a job at Play now because I thought he was handicapped. Because actually, fun fact, George is granted a private bathroom because of his handicap. And he says a line in there. He says, "I love that bathroom." Well, no, that's not it. But anyways, the funny thing about this, though, is that it was a reference back to season 2 in The Revenge when George quit his job because he was upset about not being allowed to use his boss's private bathroom. So it's kind of like, like a throwback to that in some ways. As again, there are some writers who are trying to do inside jokes based off of material from the previous episodes. This episode also is dedicated to Brandon Tartikoff, former NBC president who passed away a month before the start of the season. Let me see here. Again, for the second time in the series, the first time was back in the Bizarro Jerry, where they played Sheena Easton's Morning Train 9 to 5 whenever they had a sequence of George at Play Now when things seemed to be going well for him. But yeah, that's pretty much the Butter Shave. Again, solid opener, of course. Like I said, some of these episodes don't really stand out too much to me, but there's little pieces that do, but I get the writing for most of them. You can tell, again, like I said, in this last season, they were trying to do some different things. That's the Butter Shave, though. Next, though, is definitely one of my favorite episodes in Season 9, The Voice. All I can say is, hello, not at all, la la la. The backstory behind that episode is definitely hilarious, though. But we'll talk about that in the next episode. The Voice. We got 23 reviews left for this review series, guys. So once again, guys, that's my thoughts on the Butter Shave. What are your thoughts on the Butter Shave? Did you want to eat that tasty, buttery, delicious-looking turkey till Kramer's head appeared on it? Have you ever had anybody write your coattails? Have you ever had an experience like Elaine where you've broken up, got back there, got back there on a 22-hour flight home, and met a guy that you refer to as vegetable lasagna? Make sure your thoughts down in the comment section below. Be sure as always to slap a like on the video, subscribe for more content on my channel, follow me on Twitter as well at DemandAirboy93. Until then, guys, I'm checking out. I'll catch you all later. Have a great rest of your night, and peace out, everybody.